To truly understand the tragedy of Hypatia and to understand why her death is often cited by historians as the precise moment the classical world ended and the Dark Ages began, we cannot simply look at the day she died. We have to look at the world that created her and a rotting, violent, paranoid world that decided she had to be erased. We have to travel back to the year 415 AD to a city that was the jewel of the Mediterranean, but a jewel that was beginning to crack under the weight of its own history. We are in Alexandria, Egypt, but you must banish the image of pyramids and quiet deserts from your mind. This is not the Egypt of the pharaohs. This is a Greek city built by Alexander the Great, ruled by Romans, and populated by the most cosmopolitan mix of human beings on the face of the earth. Imagine walking down the Canopic Way, the massive central avenue of the city, lined with white marble colonnades that gleam so brightly under the North African sun that it hurts your eyes. To your left, you hear Greek philosophers debating logic. To your right, Roman soldiers shout orders in Latin in the marketplaces. Egyptian merchants sell spices and papyrus. It is a city of the mind. It is a city where the most valuable currency is not gold, but knowledge. Dominating the skyline is the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its fire burns day and night, guiding ships into the harbour. But for centuries, the true light of Alexandria wasn't the fire on the tower. It was the great library, it was the museum. It was the idea that human reason could unlock the secrets of the universe. However, by the early 5th century, the Golden Age is rusting, the Roman Empire is crumbling. The old pagan god Zeus, Serapis, Isis are dying, their temples smashed or converted into churches. Christianity has become the state religion, and with this new power comes a terrifying, aggressive zeal. The city is a powder keg. Christians, Jews, and pagans are living side by side, but the air is thick with tension. Every street corner is a potential battlefield. In the middle of this chaotic, violent, and transforming world, there lived a woman who refused to be defined by the chaos. Her name was Hypatia. Hypatia was born around 355 or 370 AD. Dates are hazy, but we know exactly who she was. She was the daughter of Theon, the last head of the Museum of Alexandria. Theon was a brilliant mathematician, a man who dedicated his life to preserving the works of Euclid and Ptolemy. But his greatest creation was not a book or a commentary, it was his daughter. In an era when women were expected to be silent, domestic, and invisible, confined to the gyneceum, the women's quarters, Theon raised Hypatia to be a king of the mind. He educated her, he taught her mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Legend says he put her through a rigorous physical training regime as well, believing that a sound mind requires a sound body. He didn't raise her to be a wife, he raised her to be a philosopher, and she surpassed him. The historical records are clear on this. The student outgrew the master. Hypatia became the leading mathematician and astronomer of her age. She didn't hide away in a dusty room, she took to the streets. She wore the tribun, the heavy, rough cloak that was traditionally the uniform of male philosophers. This was a visual shock to the people of Alexandria. A woman, dressed like a man of learning, driving her own chariot through the center of the city. She was a superstar. She was the head of the Neoplatonic school in Alexandria. Powerful men, governors, future bishops, and aristocrats traveled from Syria, from Constantinople, from Rome, just to sit at her feet and hear her speak. She taught them about the one, the philosophical idea of a supreme, abstract divinity that could be reached through math and reason. She taught them how to use an astrolabe, a complex device used to chart the positions of the stars. She was described as beautiful, stunningly so. But she had absolutely no interest in romance. She was married to the truth. There is a famous story, recorded by ancient historians, that perfectly captures her character. A student of hers fell madly in love with her. He couldn't focus on the lectures. He was obsessed with her beauty. He confessed his love to her. Hypatia didn't blush. She didn't gently let him down. She picked up a cloth that she used for her menstrual blood, threw it at his feet, and said, "This is what you are in love with, young man. This is the reality of the flesh." It is not beautiful. She used the most biological, grounded reality to snap him out of his fantasy, forcing him to look up from the physical body to the abstract mind. That was Hypatia, brutally rational, unapologetically intellectual. For a long time, she was safe. She was so respected that even the Christians left her alone. She had Christian students. She was a neutral party in a divided city. But in 412 AD, the atmosphere in Alexandria shifted. The old patriarch died, and a new man took the throne of the church. His name was Cyril. We need to talk about Cyril. In the history of the church, he is a saint. In the history of Alexandria, he is a warlord. Cyril was a man of immense ambition. He didn't just want to save souls, he wanted to rule the city. He believed that the church should be supreme, not just in spiritual matters, but in political ones. He commanded a private army, the Parabolani. The Parabolani were a group of roughly 500 to 600 men. Originally, they were recruited from the lower classes to work as stretcher bearers, to carry the sick and bury the dead during plagues. They were tough, immune to the sight of blood, and fanatically loyal to the bishop. Under Cyril, they stopped being nurses and started being a militia. They were his enforcers. Standing in Cyril's way was the Roman governor, Orestes. Orestes was a Christian, but he was a moderate. He represented the secular law of the Roman Empire. He believed that the emperor, not the bishop, ran the city. He believed in order and, crucially, Orestes was a close friend of Hypatia. He admired her, he visited her house often. He sought her counsel on how to run the city. In the eyes of Orestes, Hypatia was a wise advisor. In the eyes of Cyril, this friendship was a threat. Cyril looked at the governor and saw a man he couldn't control, and why couldn't he control him? Because, in Cyril's mind, that pagan which was whispering in his ear. The conflict between Orestes and Cyril started with the Jewish community. This is a part of the story often left out, but it is critical. Cyril wanted to expel the Jews from Alexandria. He incited mobs to attack synagogues. Orestes was furious. He wrote to the emperor to complain about the bishop. The tension escalated into open warfare in the streets. At one point, a group of monks came down from the Nitrian desert to support Cyril. They surrounded Orestes' chariot. One of them, a monk named Ammonius, picked up a rock and threw it. It smashed Orestes in the head. The governor of Alexandria was covered in blood. His guards, fearing the mob, fled. Orestes was only saved because the ordinary citizens of Alexandria stepped in to protect him. Orestes had the monk Ammonius arrested, tortured, and executed for the assault. Cyril's response was shocking. He took the body of the executed monk, brought it to the church, and declared him a martyr. He tried to tell the city that this man, who had tried to assassinate the governor, was a saint. Even the Christians in Alexandria thought this was going too far, and Cyril eventually had to back down. But Cyril was humiliated. He had lost the battle for public opinion. He needed a victory. He needed to break Orestes. But he realized he couldn't touch Orestes directly. The governor was protected by the army and the law. So, he looked at the person standing next to Orestes. He looked at the woman. A whisper campaign began. It was slow at first, then it became a roar. In the churches, in the markets, in the bathhouses, the rumors spread. They said that Hypatia wasn't just a philosopher. They said she was a sorceress. They said she practiced black magic. Remember the astrolabe she used? To an uneducated monk from the desert, a brass instrument that measured the stars looked like a tool of the devil. To them, mathematics was a code for summoning demons. The narrative was crafted perfectly. Orestes is a good Christian, but he has been bewitched. He is under a spell. The reason Orestes hates the bishop, the reason there is no peace in the city, is because of her. She became the scapegoat for all the city's problems. She was the other, the pagan, the intellectual, the woman who dared to tell men what to do. Hypatia must have known the danger. Her friends warned her. The streets were becoming unsafe. The Parabolani were watching her house, but she refused to hide. Perhaps she believed that her status protected her. Perhaps she believed that reason would always prevail over mob rule. Or perhaps she simply refused to let fear dictate her life. She continued to teach. She continued to drive her chariot. Until a day in March, during the holy season of Lent, in the year 415. The sequence of events that follows is one of the most gruesome in recorded history. It is difficult to recount, but we must face it to understand the magnitude of the loss. Hypatia was returning home from her lectures. It was a normal day. She was riding in her chariot, likely thinking about the movement of the planets or a commentary on Plato. She turned a corner near the center of the city, and suddenly the street was blocked. A mob of hundreds of men, led by a lector named Peter, surrounded her. These were the Parabolani, fueled by religious fervor and the rumors Cyril had spread. They dragged her from her chariot. Imagine the sheer terror of that moment. 1 minute, you are the most respected scholar in the empire, a woman who dines with governors. The next, you are in the hands of a frenzied, screaming crowd. They didn't just want to kill her, they wanted to punish her for existing. They dragged her through the streets to a building called the Caesarion. Ironically, this building had begun its life as a temple to the Caesars, a place of imperial worship, but had been converted into a church. It was meant to be a house of God. It became a slaughterhouse. Inside the cool, shadowed halls of the church, beneath the eyes of the painted icons, they stripped her naked. This was the first step of the ritual humiliation. They wanted to strip away her dignity, her status, her philosophical robes, and reduce her to just a body. And then, the killing began. The historical sources, specifically the writings of the historian Socrates Scholasticus, who was a Christian himself and horrified by the event, give us a specific, stomach-turning detail about the weapon they used. The text says they used a stroker. In translation, this word is often rendered as oyster shells or roofing tiles. These were sharp, jagged shards of ceramic or broken pottery. The mob didn't just stab her, they flayed her. They used these sharp edges to scrape the flesh from her bones while she was likely still alive. It was a slow, agonizing, frenzied destruction. They tore her limb from limb. The violence was performative. It was a message. It was a statement to Orestes, to the Jews, to the remaining pagans, and to anyone who dared to prioritize secular knowledge over religious dogma. It was a statement that said, "This is what happens to those who stand in our way. Your logic, your math, your status, none of it can save you." But the horror didn't end with her death. The mob gathered her mangled remains, her limbs, her torso, and dragged them out of the city to a place called Cineron. There, they built a massive pyre and burned her body to ash. This final act was significant. In the ancient world, a proper burial was essential for the peace of the soul. By burning her, they were denying her that final rest. But more symbolism was at play here. They were treating her like garbage, like a disease that had to be cauterized from the body of the city. They wanted to leave nothing behind. No grave to visit, no relics to venerate, just ash blowing in the wind. When the smoke cleared, a silence fell over Alexandria. The reaction to the murder was shock. Even the Christian world was appalled. Hypatia was not a militant pagan. She was a beloved teacher who had taught many Christians. The intellectual elite were horrified. Orestes, the governor, was broken. His closest ally, his intellectual partner, had been butchered to get to him. He effectively disappears from the historical record shortly after this. He likely requested a transfer or simply gave up, realizing that the city was now under the true rule of the bishop. And what of Cyril? What happened to the man who pointed the finger? Nothing. There was an investigation, of course. Rome loved its bureaucracy. An appeal was sent to Constantinople. But Cyril had powerful friends. Bribery and political pressure made the charges disappear. The leader of the mob, Peter, was never punished. Cyril claimed he had never ordered the murder, that the mob had acted on its own righteous anger. He remained in power for decades. He became a saint. But the death of Hypatia had consequences far greater than the fate of one bishop or one governor. Historians often point to the death of Hypatia as the symbolic end of the classical world. It is the moment when the scale tipped. For 700 years, Alexandria had been a place where people looked up at the stars, at the mathematics of the universe, at the abstract ideas of Plato. After 415 AD, the city began to look down at dogma, at internal strife, at fear. The message had been received loud and clear by the other scholars of the city. If the most famous woman in the empire could be flayed alive in a church for the crime of being a philosopher, then no one was safe. Many philosophers packed their bags and left. They went to Athens, or back to Rome, or fled east to Persia. The brain drain began. The museum, the great university of the ancient world, didn't burn down in a single day, but its spirit was extinguished on the day Hypatia died. The open inquiry, the celebration of mathematics for mathematics' sake, began to wither. We must also address a common myth. You will often hear that Hypatia was burned inside the Great Library, or that the Great Library was burned down because of her death. This isn't historically accurate. The Great Library had likely already suffered slow destruction over centuries of fires and neglect before Hypatia was born. But in a metaphorical sense, the myth is true. Hypatia was the library. She was the living repository of centuries of Greek thought. She held the knowledge of Archimedes, of Apollonius, of Ptolemy in her mind. When she died, much of her own work died with her. We know she wrote commentaries on the conics of Apollonius and the Arithmetica of Diophantus, extremely advanced mathematics. But none of her own books survived. We only know of them because others mentioned them. The mob burned her body, but time burned her words. However, despite the best efforts of Cyril and the mob to erase her, they failed in the long run. Damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory, did not work on Hypatia. Why do we still talk about her 1,600 years later? Why are you watching a video about her right now? Because she represents something that is timeless and incredibly fragile. She represents the courage to stand alone. She represents the idea that the truth, mathematical truth, scientific truth, is worth more than political safety or social conformity. She is the archetype of the martyr for science. Hypatia stands at the crossroads of history. She is the last flower of the Greek summer before the long winter of the Dark Ages. It is heartbreaking to imagine what she could have achieved if she had been allowed to live another 20 or 30 years. What problems would she have solved? What students would she have trained? The loss is incalculable. But there is also an irony in her death. The men who killed her thought they were destroying a witch. Instead, they created a legend. For centuries, through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, artists and writers looked back at Hypatia. She became a symbol of reason against fanaticism. Raphael painted her in his masterpiece, The School of Athens. If you look at that painting, filled with men like Plato and Socrates, there is one figure looking directly at the viewer with a calm, steady gaze. That is Hypatia. She is the only woman in the room. Even in death, she forces her way back into the conversation. As we conclude this dark journey into the streets of Alexandria, we have to ask ourselves, what is the lesson here? It is easy to look at the mob in 415 AD and call them barbarians. It is easy to say, that was the past, we are civilized now, but the psychology of the mob hasn't changed. The fear of what we don't understand hasn't changed. The desire to silence the person who speaks a different truth hasn't changed. Hypatia's story is a warning. It is a warning that civilization is not a guarantee. It is a fragile thing that must be protected. The light of knowledge doesn't burn automatically, it has to be tended to. And sometimes, the people tending that fire get burned. We don't know the exact location of Hypatia's grave, because she has none. Her ashes were scattered to the winds of Egypt, but in a way, that is fitting. She belongs to the air, to the cosmos, to the stars she loved so dearly. She is not confined to the earth that treated her so cruelly. Before you go, I have a small request. Stories like Hypatia's are hard to tell, but they are necessary. If you believe in keeping these stories alive, please smash that like button. It helps us fight against the algorithm, which is the modern version of the mob. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We have so many more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history coming up. I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the Dark Ages were inevitable, or did the murder of Hypatia accelerate the fall of the classical world? Let's have a respectful discussion down there. Until next time, keep looking up at the stars. Thank you for watching.